Here we go. It's part 1, chapter 25 of the urinary system. We're going to look at the kidney and all of its renal functions in this chapter. We are on page 954, and there are a number of topics that we have to consider here with little red bullets at the beginning. And pretty much we're going to have to consider the regulation of total volume of water in the body, which would be interstitial fluids, as well as the fluid of the blood and lymphatic system, regulating the concentrations of certain things having to do with tonicity. So pH and sodium will be very essential, and we'll get into more of that when we get to a different chapter after this. And then ensuring long-term acid-base, basically pH. We're considering here the hydrogen ion. And of course, then we're going to be also excreting metabolic wastes. And the more complex the foods that we're eating, then the more work that the kidney will do. The bullets go on for quite a while here, because remember, this is also a subspecialty of internal medicine. Which means that many times you're in a small class, small groups in MD school, talking to these guys, and they're definitely talking about things like daytime and nighttime cocktails and lots of little details. So erythropoiesis, this is where we get EPO, is from the kidney. Vitamin D is activated at the kidney. It's produced in our skin in the presence of sunlight. It's a steroid hormone, but we don't get the active form from the skin. It becomes the active form once it gets to the kidney. And gluconeogenesis plays a role here. Never underestimate, ladies and gentlemen, the relationship between kidney and heart. If you're going to regulate anything about fluid in the body, you have to regulate the heart. And also because part of this regulation has to do with dialysis, which is to say filtering of the blood by the kidney. You need blood pressure for that. And so in the same regard that if we have low blood volume, low blood pressure, there's not enough oxygen to the brain, it's possible for your patient to pass out. We call that shock. Another kind of shock, though, is the inability of the kidney to filter, and we call that renal failure or renal shock. So these are all important details. And the overlook here is we are very retroperitoneal. You'll notice that there are no abdominal organs here present in the picture. We have our diaphragm up here. We're way up against the back wall of the abdominal cavity up here, right against the bony structure of the spinal column. We have our aorta, our inferior vena cava, and notice that these are, how shall I say, lacking symmetry with regard to, for instance, the artery that's going to the right kidney is going to be very long, and the artery going to the left kidney shorter, the vein going to the left kidney quite long, and recall that that was collecting the venous blood from the gonads on this side. And over here we have a short renal vein. Notice also that we have a ureter coming down here. Ureter known as, oh, they're not calling it that, they're giving us other information over here. So here's the ureter over here. Okay. Don't confuse ureter with urethra. That's down the road after the ureter and all of that. That's on the way out. Okay, we have our bladder here. One thing that it's not so easy to notice, but it could be noticed right here, is that the ureter is approaching the bladder from the back. And here we have the rectum, and the bladder is actually anterior and inferior. We would also be having the uterus in the female right here in the central region, but just behind. So it would be from anterior to middle to posterior. We would have the urinary bladder, the ureter, and I'm sorry, the uterus, and the rectum right there. So 1, 2, 3 back in that direction. Okay, so notice also, I think the position of this, we're erect species. The kidneys are not resting on anything. If we were a four-legged animal, the kidneys would actually be resting softly on the organs. And so the kidneys would be going along for the ride as one of the top riders on top of the intestines of your dog, your cat, a horse, a cow, etc. Four-legged animal will not have as much, shall we say, challenge to the position of the kidney, whereas in a human, we're actually walking, running, and carrying on our lives in the erect position. There's nothing down here holding the kidney in its place. If you're a long-haul truck driver, you'll notice that the seats of those cabs are quite springy. They're practically like on a trampoline or something. So the idea there is to avoid shocking the kidneys with any kind of sudden bounces. Okay, so there's that aspect. The position of the kidneys, as you can see, way back retroperitoneal. Here is the alimentary canal and also the peritoneal sac and so on. But the aorta and the inferior vena cava are very posterior, right up against the anterior wall of the vertebrae, right there. And we have this little sort of like invagination back here where the kidneys fit. They're showing us just barely that there is a fibrous capsule, but there's also pararenal fat. So this occurs in a capsule. There's a capsule outside of that as well. Okay, so this is sort of doubly encapsulated. It's got cushioning, so things are pretty stable there for the most part, as long as you're not running marathons on concrete sidewalks or something. So here's the kidney, sort of cleaned up a little bit. It's a photograph. Over here we have the artistic rendition, a little bit easier to look at. Notice that we're actually demarking two things right there. Here we have the cortex. It's referred to as the renal cortex. This is where the action is, so to speak. All of the glomeruli and all of the filtration occurs up here. In here we have this sort of like parallel little lines here. These are the collecting ducts for the most part, some loops of Henle and so on. But basically this is called the medulla, and all of the downward flow here of the resulting filtrate, soon to become urine, is going to flow in here. Here we have minor calyces leading to a major calyx. Right? Minor calyces are these little small openings right here, and they're actually the first to collect the filtrate, and then the filtrate flows together into the major calyces. The major calyx comes over this way, and we get to the pelvis of the, there should be a demarcation here. Not really. Okay, so anyways, we have our ureter here, and there's going to be the outflow here of filtrate. So the incoming arterial blood gets filtered. The resulting reuptake of essential nutrients goes back to the vein. So the blood in the vein is actually cleaner than the blood here. And then the resulting left that's been taken out and not put back into the venous system is coming this way. It's called the filtrate, eventually going down through the ureter to the urinary bladder and then out of the body into the sewage system of the city. And that's going to be the urine. So that which is removed. We'll get into the details of that.